Greetings and salutations, everyone. I hope everyone is still doing well, and welcome to today's bonus. Before we jump into it, a couple links. As many of you know, I rely on Patreon, PayPal, channel membership, and the merch to help the channel to continue to grow and go. Links to Patreon, PayPal, and channel membership is in the description below. Merch is displayed directly under the video. Also, Dogman Frightening Encounters, Volume 1 through 3, the audiobook versions. They were written and researched by Tom Lyons, narrated and produced by me, Jeff Nadomley. Those audiobooks are available on Audible, Amazon, and iTunes, links to which are also in the description as well. And finally, last but definitely not least, if you'd really like to help support the channel to continue to grow and go, simply subscribe. It does not cost a cent. Click that like button, takes half a second. If you don't want to miss out on any of the informative uploads I put out daily, click that bell icon. And folks, please leave a comment and share this video. Why? Well, because all these things really do help the channel to continue to grow and go, and folks, they definitely matter. Now, everyone, I've taken far too much of your time. Let's jump into today's bonus, shall we? Today's first encounter, Harrison County, Texas. My father and I were walking along the fence line on our way to the deer stands. I'm a long-time outdoorsman, used to the woods and familiar with the creatures that live there. I climbed up into the first deer stand to be on watch for a buck. My father continued along the 5-strand barbed wire fence, up and over a little hill and down into the lowland. It had not rained for a long time, so the ground was dry, even though it was low and should have been at least damp, if not wet. He too climbed up into his deer stand to watch for a buck. Instead of a buck, I saw a large creature, taller than a tall man. The top of his head a yard above the top strand of the barbed wire fence. The creature was walking upright on its hind legs, taking long, deliberate strides. Walking along the fence line, it was hairy, hair covered its head, face, and neck. It didn't have a long nose like a bear does. It was still early in the morning with deep shadows, no bright sunshine to light up the path. The creature strode purposely on, up and over the hill and out of my sight. But not before the horses in the pasture sensed the creature's presence, whined loudly, then bolted, running away across the field. My father then heard the dry cracking of the canebrake. Something large was breaking the spindly stalks as it made its way along, then stopped for a bit with some more thrashing, crackling noises, then continued on beyond where it could be heard. But not before my father got a good strong whiff of some terrible, unpleasant scent. I honestly expected to hear a rifle crack, but no such sound came. I climbed down my deer stand and walked up and over the hill to join my father. I learned that my father had not seen the creature, only heard and smelled it. We searched in the canebrake for tracks, but because the ground was dry and hard, came up with nothing but a discovery of what had been a wild bee honeycomb, apparently eaten by the creature. Today's second encounter, Panola, Texas. A friend and I were bow fishing on the Sabine River. We'd been drifting downstream all morning, looking for fish to shoot with our new bow fishing bows and gear. We would use the trolling motor to guide us and the current to pull. Sometime around lunch, we heard some noise in the tree line on the north side of the riverbank. We didn't really think much of it. There are deer and wild hog all over this area. A few hours later, we came around a bend of the river, and I looked up on the bank and saw something moving. I never said anything to my friend because I was unsure of what I had seen. As we drifted down, I saw a large, dark figure walking through the tree line, and I turned to find my friend looking at it as well. We never said a word. We just sat and watched. As we continued to watch this large creature move slowly through the trees, I got a better view. I was looking at the back of this creature, and it was large. My friend and I are both 6'3", 230, and 250. We're pretty good size ourselves. This creature was at least 7 feet tall and had to weigh 350 pounds. It had very dark brown hair on its body, maybe 2 to 3 inches long. Its head had longer hair and was almost black from what I could see. It wasn't moving very fast and looked to be having a hard time walking. We watched it for about 2 or 3 minutes until it was out of sight. We quietly started back upstream. We didn't want to piss it off. The bank of the river was only 4 to 5 feet tall, and we were within 100 yards. We talked about it after we got the boat loaded and started back home in the truck. We both agreed that we had seen the same thing and couldn't believe it. Today's third encounter. Panola, Texas. When I was about 16, which was back in 1988, my friends and I always spent our weekends and breaks from school at my hunting camp on Sabine River in Panola County, Texas. We would hunt and fish and live off the land mostly. One evening we had been fishing and had caught a lot of catfish, so we cleaned our catch at the camp well. It was an old type well with a hand pump. We built a fire and began to cook our fish. We had just finished eating when we heard a noise from where we had cleaned our fish. We're used to having varmints such as raccoon and possum and coyotes come in and get the guts of the fish. Well, I had my flashlight and my .22 rifle and went to shoot whatever was getting the guts. When I was about 50 or so yards from the well, I heard a moan. Not a growl, but a moan. I could see a large, dark mass at the well. I thought it was just several raccoons in a wad eating. So I raised my light, and when I did, the large mass stood erect on 2 feet. I thought it was someone playing a trick on me. I immediately called to the person, or what I thought to be a person. I told them that I had a gun and I was going to use it. The thing didn't move or answer. I called again, and I said, "This is not funny. I'm scared and I'm going to shoot." I stand 6 foot even and weigh 250. This thing was at least 6'5" or taller, way bigger than me. As I got closer, my light exposed more of this thing. It began to move as I got closer. It was covered in what looked like mud-covered hair. I can't tell you the color because it was all matted up with mud, just like pigs do to get rid of the biting insects. Well, the closer I got, the more scared I got. I fired a couple shots off into the air to hopefully see if it was some joker, and they'd tell me not to shoot. The thing ran off, but not far. I could hear its footsteps in the leaves. I walked back to tell my buddies and to get help, and none of them would go back with me to the well. The next day there were large 5-toed footprints at the well, and all the guts were gone except for the heads. My buddies all said I was playing a prank and made the tracks myself, but I wear a size 13 shoe, and these tracks were longer and wider than my shoe. I spend lots of time in the woods of East Texas, and am as close to an expert as you can get on the wildlife around here. And I can tell you what I saw was as of yet an unclassified animal. Today's fourth encounter. Panola, Texas. I'm a 42-year-old computer systems administrator who lives in East Texas on my 133-acre farm with my wife and 2 teenage children. Although I was born in the big city, I've spent the majority of my life in the country, and I'm an avid outdoorsman, as the rest of my immediate family and relatives are. I will try to relate only the facts and necessary details, but please bear in mind that the story I am about to relate to you is the most incredible encounter I have ever had in northeast Texas pine woods. As such, I feel detail is important. It was late November of 1992, and my wife and I were deer hunting on a nearby 9,000-acre hunting lease with my aunt, uncle, and niece. This area, which is bordered on one side by 5 miles of the Sabine River, is some of the most remote forest land that I know of. The area in which we hunt is really out of the way, as the nearest inhabited farmhouse is approximately 7 to 8 miles as the crow flies. As serious outdoorsmen, we pride ourselves in finding such inaccessible hunting spots. And this one was no exception, as it required a 6-mile drive down an old logging road, followed by a 15-minute ride on a four-wheeler deep into the Sabine River bottomland. It was an evening hunt, and after disembarking the four-wheeler, I walked my wife to her tree stand and settled her in. I then took a 10-minute walk down the old fire lane to my tree stand. I made a mental note of how quiet the woods were that evening, as if there was a serious predator in the immediate area. 3 hours later, right before dusk, I heard the familiar crack of my wife's rifle. So I began to walk back to investigate. Upon arriving at my wife's location, I met my aunt, uncle, and niece, who also heard the shot, as they were headed our way on their four-wheeler to rendezvous with us and begin the journey back. My wife described how a group of 4 deer had emerged within close range of her tree stand. Upon shooting the biggest one, the other 3 ran into the woods. To my wife's dismay, the deer she shot struggled to its feet and attempted to follow. Rather than taking another shot, my wife had reasonably assumed that the deer was not going to go far, and simply waited for me to arrive. The deer's wound was fatal, as it was leaving a heavy blood trail. Even though the sun had already set by the time I got there, the trail was easy to follow by my flashlight. My uncle and I left the rest of our party and proceeded to the trail of the deer, armed with 2 fresh flashlights and a high-powered rifle. We could tell by the tracks in the low, wet spot that it was a large deer weighing 160 to 180 pounds, approximately 100 yards into the woods. We came to the spot where the deer had laid down for the last time. There was a large quantity of blood, but no deer and no immediate trail. We instinctively began to circle the spot, trying to pick up a trail again. When we did, it was very faint. Even though the trail had reduced itself to a trickle of blood every now and then, it was still reasonably easy to follow, as it was straight, and traversed open woods. After approximately 15 minutes of following the new trail, we came to a downed tree, at which the trail seemed to end. This was a large sweet gum tree that was much too large for us to step over, but after climbing over to the other side, we picked up a faint trail again. Upon leaving the downed tree, the trail began more sparse. Eventually, we crossed a shallow creek with steep banks and picked up the trail on the other side. Approximately 50 yards across the creek, we came to a spot on the back side of a large white oak tree on which the ground was very bloody, but no deer. At that point, the trail, which had been very straight and deliberate, decided to take a 90-degree turn. We didn't say anything at the time, but by now my uncle and I had reached the same conclusion. This deer is being carried. It was being carried by something large enough to traverse obstacles that we had to climb over and wade across. Something that had stopped momentarily behind a large tree to see if we were still following. It was well past sundown now, and we had been on the trail for a good 45 minutes. The moon was high and bright, but my flashlight was beginning to fade. Since my uncle's light was larger and brighter, we decided to turn mine off and save what was left. Shortly after, it decided to confront us. It's not what we saw because we never saw it, even though we were within 50 yards of it. Just on the other side of the small clearing, it's what we heard. I can tell you that I've heard everything from panthers screaming to a charging 400-pound wild boar, but I have never heard anything like that sound it made. To this day, I've only used one word to describe it: big. I didn't find its incredibly loud, roaring howl hard to interpret. It was letting us know under no certain terms that the chase was over, and it was time for us to go home. It was so loud that the rest of our party back at the fire lane heard it and thought we were on our way back and playing a joke on them. At that point, our party began yelling for us, which caused this thing to growl back at them and challenge. The whole exchange had me so rattled that it took me at least 30 seconds to realize that I was the one with the semi-automatic cow-powered rifle and a flashlight. Nonetheless, I still remained at the ready and concentrated on exactly where the sound was coming from, across the opening. My uncle and I have spent many hours together in the woods, and it didn't require the spoken word for us to know what the plan was. I immediately flanked to the downwind side of the opening, hoping to either force this thing to drop the deer and run, push it into the opening where we could see it in the bright moonlight, or confront me in the tall open timber, where I would have a good clean shot. I suppose in executing this maneuver, it was my dogged desire not to make this deer the first one that we ever lost. Whatever the reason, the plan didn't work. Whether or not it was for the better remains to be seen. I eventually slipped all the way around the edge of the opening back to where my uncle was positioned. Neither of us saw the thing. At that point, we decided it was time to head back. 10 minutes into the walk back, our party started whooping for us again. Before we were able to respond, something else decided to take up the reply. We kept moving through the open woods and in the direction of the fire lane. Every time our party let out a whoop, it would answer in a challenging tone, and it was getting closer. As we approached the fire lane, the underbrush became dense, except for one opening about 100 feet wide. My uncle and I instinctively positioned ourselves on both sides of the opening. Whatever was following us would have to come directly between us before it entered the fire lane. As we crouched in wait behind two large trees, we heard one of the four-wheelers start and head away from us down the fire lane. We immediately broke for the opening and trotted down the fire lane to where our party was waiting. Upon arriving, my wife told us that they heard me walk out of the woods and head in the opposite direction down the lane, walking as if I was carrying something heavy. Upon hearing this, my niece decided to crank up the four-wheeler and go and pick me up. This does bear some importance, as I'm a pretty heavy fella myself, 6'1", 240. However, obviously it wasn't me they heard breaking out of the woods and walking down the dry leaf-covered fire lane. I immediately mounted the other four-wheeler and caught up with my niece before she came face to face with who knows what. We all headed home, neither one of us saying very much. We had enough hunting for one day. However, we returned for several days after that, hoping to find vultures, a carcass, or another sign of the deer or its culprit. We never found anything. For some reason, even prior to this incident, we always referred to this area as one of the most unfriendly feeling spots we had ever hunted. Today's fifth encounter happened roughly 20 miles from where I sit right now. I was staying with my brother and father at a cabin on a hunting retreat in the upper part of New York, near Speculator. We'd gone out there to hunt deer during the 2016 black powder season. I was up late, sharpening knives for the dressing and cooking of anything we managed to bag. It was about 2 in the morning, and I was getting ready to go to sleep once I finished the last knife. I saw the security light outside flick on, and got up to go take a look and see what it was. You're not allowed to take a deer at night, but I figured there was no harm in just looking, seeing which way it went so I could track it tomorrow. And if it wasn't a deer, it'd still be nice to see the local wildlife before I retired for the night. So I look out the window and see these two big coyote-looking dogs with huge heads outside on all fours. I initially thought they were coy wolves, a hybrid between a coyote and a large dog, which happens sometimes in this area. So I watched these things sniff around. We had grilled some hot dogs earlier. They must have been come looking for the smell. I watched them for a few minutes, and then one of them does this weird jittering motion. It sort of stretched its hind legs out one at a time, and even though there was a window there, I could hear a popping sound, a real horrible noise. This thing did one leg, then the other, and then it sort of rolled its shoulders, made another popping sound, and stood up on its hind legs. We had put our bags of deer scent and stuff into the tree, like you would to keep bears out of it, tied up in the tree. This thing reaches up, grabs the bag, and pulls it down. The thing rips open the bag and tears through it. It finds the deer urine and sniffs it. Then it seems almost angry and throws it at the wall of the cabin. At this point, it spots me. This thing looks at me, locks eyes, and stands there while the second one stands up on its hind legs. They were both staring at me for a few seconds and staring me down. I literally thought I was going to die. They seemed angry that I had seen them or upset about it. They turned and ran off, still on their hind legs. I broke down crying, locked myself in the bathroom, and refused to leave the cabin for the rest of the trip. I stayed there and dressed and cooked the deer. I wouldn't go outside and actually covered the window in my bedroom because I was convinced I was going to wake up with one of them staring at me. I estimate both creatures to be about 8.5 feet tall. I couldn't see genitals on either one of them. They had green, luminous eyes and were colored like coyote, tan with gray on their back and white or cream bellies. They had tufts on the end of their ears like a bobcat, long tail like a wolf's tail, fluffy like that. Terrifying encounter, but the guy is obviously from New York City. A lot of people come up to my area during hunting season from the city. I live in a very touristy area. First, there is no coy wolves in my area. A coy wolf is not a coyote that bred with a dog, a large dog. I did a show recently about like coyotes and stuff. A coy wolf is a coyote wolf hybrid. And that doesn't happen around here. Coy dog does. They're very small, about 30 to 40 pounds, if that. And chances are they're not even a coy dog, it's a coyote. But just wanted to throw my 2 cents in since it is my neck of the woods. Today's 6th encounter. I was hog hunting from a tree stand next to the Sabine River. I had gone to my stand around 5:30. I put out sliced apples and table scraps to hold the hog for a few minutes for a shot. I got in my tree stand and waited for the woods to settle down and the sun to rise. At sun up, I heard hog rooting around, working the river's edge towards me. I could first see them on my left about 45 degrees, about 50 yards out. Not a clean shot. Waiting for them to get to my bait area, I noticed movement to my right about 80 yards out. Putting my rifle scope on it, I could see only the side of something's face. It was dark, hair covered, and slowly moving its head around, looking in the direction of the hogs. At this time, it quickly moved to another tree. I could see most of its body. It was huge, standing on 2 legs, slowly looking around the tree at the hog. At this time, I was quite afraid, but tried to keep my scope on it to study its features. The hog were feeding towards my bait area, and the animal was working toward the hog. It moved quickly and disappeared. It quickly reappeared, moving to another tree, still looking at the hog. I could again study its features. At this time, I was quite afraid, but tried to keep my scope on it. Its movement from tree to tree was a quick leap, landing at the base of the next tree on 2 feet, standing behind the tree and slowly looking around at the hog. This continued for several minutes until they were about 30 yards apart and almost directly in front of me. about 40 yards. The animal dropped to all fours, bunched up its rear legs, and leapt. It took 2 leaps to reach the hog, and it screamed during the second leap, causing the hog to panic for a split second. The second leap ended with it slapping one hog on its side, knocking it through the air into the side of the tree. As the squealing hog bounced off the tree, it pounced on it, beating it with its fist like a person pounding on a desk. I could hear bones crunching with each hit. All this happened very fast, about 4 seconds from the first leap to the dead hog. The quickness of the attack was very unnerving. The 3 live hogs were in full flight. The animal picked up the dead hog, tucked it under its arm, and started walking off, and let out this noise like grr whoop, whoop whoop. It was immediately answered from 200 to 300 yards out by a shorter whoop whoop. After a couple more steps in the direction of the answer, it stopped and dropped the hog and turned to look past me. It turned back my tree stand and raised its head and looked up at me. I have never been more afraid in my life. I tried to keep the scope on its head in case it came after me. It looked at me, cocked its head to the side. Its face had a curious expression as if studying me. It opened its mouth, showing its teeth and letting out a soft rrr sound. It then turned back and picked up the hog and walked off in no hurry, as if I didn't exist. I was looking through my 3x9 scope, originally set on 3 power for the hunt, but turned it to 9 power after first trying to see the object approaching from my right. After that time, I was afraid to make any movement necessary to take the scope off power 9. I sat in the tree stand for another 30 minutes or so, trying to calm myself down. After concluding that if it wanted me, it would have already slapped me out of the tree stand, I got down and went to find my hunting partner, who was about a quarter of a mile away. He had heard the attack scream and both whooping calls.
Well, there you have it, folks. Today's bonus upload. I hope you all enjoyed it as much as I enjoyed sharing it with you. Thank you all for supporting this channel. It is, after all, your support that keeps this channel growing and going, and honestly what gives people a chance and a place to share their experiences and theories judgment-free. Everyone, please stay safe, happy, healthy, and ever vigilant, keeping an eye on our children, pets, family, and friends. These creatures are real. They are out there and dangerous. Share this information with those you love and care about, and it may just help save their lives someday. Until next time, never stop asking questions, never stop searching for the answers, and God bless.